On March 4, 1961, at 6:35 a.m., 22-year-old Elena Ward left her rented room on Riverside Drive in Bend, Oregon, to bike to her early shift at a small diner on the east side of town. She never arrived. She never called in. Her paycheck from the week before was still in her locker. Within hours, a quiet mountain town that prided itself on safety was asking the same question. What happened to Elena Ward on that cold March morning? 55 years later, one fragment of overlooked evidence would return her name to the center of an active investigation. The case had never been declared solved. It also had never really been understood. In 1961, Bend sat on the edge of the high desert, growing but still small enough that most residents recognized each other by sight. Logging trucks rolled through Main Street before sunrise. The mills set the rhythm of the day. People left front doors unlocked and keys in ignitions. Serious crime was rare, and a missing adult usually meant someone had left town by choice. That assumption shaped the first hours of the response when Elena did not show up for work. Her routine was predictable. She worked the opening shift 3 days a week, biking the same 2-mile route from her rooming house to the diner, cutting across a service road lined with sparse pines and utility poles. Coworkers remembered her as punctual to the minute. When she was not behind the counter by 7 a.m., her supervisor called her room, then the hospital, then finally the police. Outside, the temperature hovered just above freezing. Patchy snow still clung to the shaded ditches along the route Elena normally took. A light wind pushed low clouds over the Cascades. Traffic was thin at that hour. There were no reported accidents, no stalled vehicles, nothing to explain her absence. The patrol car that rolled out from the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office that morning did not yet carry the weight of a major crime. To the deputy driving, it was a welfare check on a young woman who had probably overslept, taken a ride, or decided to quit without notice. The road he turned onto would prove him wrong. Elena Ward had lived in Bend for less than 8 months when she disappeared. She moved to Oregon from Spokane in July 1960 after being accepted into a part-time clerical program at Central Oregon College. She rented a small upstairs room on Riverside Drive, paid $10 a week, and kept a steady routine built around work and classes. Her schedule rarely changed. She opened the diner on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. She attended evening courses in accounting and record management. She visited her parents in Redmond once a month. Every detail of her life, from her receipts to her class attendance, suggested stability. Nothing pointed to a voluntary disappearance. Her coworkers described her as reserved but dependable. She avoided arguments, kept her station clean, and always balanced her register to the cent. A manager later stated she had asked about applying for a supervisory role in the summer. Friends from school said she had talked about saving for a car by the end of the year. Her handwriting in class notebooks showed plans for spring registration. Those details mattered because they created a baseline investigators would later rely on. People who intend to leave rarely map out future obligations down to specific dates. Her closest relationship in Bend was with a roommate downstairs, a 26-year-old grocery clerk named Denise Carter. Denise told police she had heard Elena come in late 2 nights before the disappearance, around 11:45 p.m., which was unusual. When she asked where she had been, Elena said only that she needed fresh air after a long day. She never explained further. Denise also reported seeing a brown pickup parked across the street during that same week, always idling with its lights off. She assumed it belonged to a neighbor until it vanished the morning Elena failed to arrive at work. Investigators later learned that Elena had visited the county records office 3 days before she went missing. The clerk remembered her asking how to request a certified copy of a document, but could not recall which one. That visit stood out because she had no known legal matters pending. There were no court filings, no job transfers, and no family issues requiring paperwork. Yet she spent nearly 20 minutes at the counter, writing something on a notepad she carried in her coat. Her behavior in those final days created a pattern investigators struggled to interpret. It was orderly but punctuated by small anomalies that never formed a clear picture. Those anomalies would gain new meaning decades later when technology finally caught up with the questions she left behind. In the week before March 4th, 1961, Elena's routine shifted in small but measurable ways. Co-workers at the diner later told deputies she started arriving 10 to 15 minutes earlier than usual and left almost as soon as her shift ended. She stopped staying to drink coffee with the cook. She kept her coat on longer, even inside, and checked the front windows more often than the others. None of them reported arguments or open conflict. What they remembered was a quiet change in how she watched the room. At the rooming house, Denise Carter noticed different behavior as well. Denise told investigators that Elena began locking her bedroom door even when she went downstairs for a few minutes. On February 27th, Denise woke up around midnight to the sound of footsteps on the front porch. When she looked through the curtain, she saw a man standing near the bottom of the stairs, facing the house. She could not see his face, only a dark jacket and a cap. By the time she turned on the hallway light, he was gone. She did not report it then because nothing appeared damaged. 3 days later, on March 1st, Elena asked Denise if she had ever felt like someone was following her home. Denise said no and asked why. Elena answered that she kept seeing the same brown pickup near the bridge by the mill road. She said it stayed 2 or 3 car lengths behind her for several blocks, then turned off without signaling. Then she changed the subject and did not bring it up again. When detectives searched Elena's room after the disappearance, they found a small spiral notebook in the top drawer of her dresser. Most pages contained class notes and grocery lists. On one page dated March 2nd, a single line stood alone. It read, or 497 something, older brown truck, same route again. The rest of the plate number was missing. There were no further entries after that date. At the time, that half-finished note looked like a dead end. Decades later, it would line up almost exactly with an old registration record no one had ever matched to her file. On the morning of March 4th, 1961, the timeline of Elena Ward's last known movements was reconstructed almost minute by minute. At 6:32 a.m., the landlady saw her wheel the bicycle off the porch and lock the front door. At 6:35 a.m., a delivery driver passing Riverside Drive later reported a young woman on a dark bike heading toward the mill road, head down against the cold. By 7:05 a.m., when Elena still was not behind the counter at the diner, her supervisor checked the clock, waited 5 more minutes, then called her rooming house. No one answered. At 7:18 a.m., he called the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office and reported an employee overdue on an early shift. Deputy Carl Jensen was dispatched at 7:31 a.m. His first stop was Riverside Drive. Denise Carter confirmed Elena had left on time and in uniform, wearing her light gray coat and carrying her work bag. Her bed was made, shoes lined near the wall, and her class books stacked on the small desk. Nothing suggested hurried packing or a planned trip. Jensen then drove the route Elena always used, a narrow service road that cut between the river and the old lumber yard before joining the highway. About 3/4 of a mile from Riverside Drive, he saw the bicycle. It lay on its side near the edge of the gravel, front wheel turned toward the ditch. The frame showed a fresh scrape along the left side, but the chain was still on and both tires were full. Next to the bike, partly in the frozen grass, was a single dark glove. It was clean, with no mud on the palm, as if it had been placed rather than dropped. There were no skid marks on the road, no broken glass, and no signs of a collision. Jensen called for backup and marked off a rough perimeter with tape from his patrol car. As he waited for another unit, he noticed faint tire impressions leading away from the road toward a stand of trees. They were wider than a passenger car and shallow, as if a truck had rolled slowly off the shoulder. When investigators photographed the scene that morning, they believed they were collecting evidence from a likely accident or voluntary disappearance. None of them yet understood that the bicycle, the glove, and those quiet tracks would define a cold case file for the next 5 decades. The first formal scene report in the disappearance of Elena Ward was filed at 10:12 a.m. on March 4th, 1961. By then, 3 deputies and the county sheriff had walked the stretch of service road where her bicycle and glove were found. Their notes showed the first real cracks in the simple explanations that morning. The bicycle had a long scrape along the left side of the frame, but there were no matching marks on the gravel or nearby posts. The front wheel still spun freely when pushed. The brake cables were intact. This did not look like the aftermath of a crash. Measurements documented another problem. From the point where the bike lay to the nearest visible disturbance in the gravel shoulder was nearly 9 feet. The pattern suggested the bicycle had been set down, not thrown or dragged. The dark glove that seemed so important at first became more suspicious on closer inspection. It was clean on both sides despite resting partly in frozen grass. There was no moisture inside, and it was a size larger than gloves found in Elena's room. When investigators canvassed the diner, the manager, Robert Hanley, raised new questions. He told deputies he had called Elena's room twice before contacting law enforcement. Once at 6:55 a.m. and once at 7:05 a.m. Telephone records later showed only a single call placed at 7:16 a.m. Hanley could not explain the difference. He claimed the wall clock in the back prep area was slow. Staff members disagreed and said the clock had been reset the day before. A second inconsistency appeared in his written statement. Hanley said Elena had seemed distracted for several days and had asked about quitting the Saturday shift. Co-workers denied this, saying she had only mentioned wanting more hours. The discrepancy turned him into the first formal person of interest, but there was no physical evidence tying him to the road where the bicycle was recovered. By the end of the first day, investigators had more contradictions than answers. The scene looked staged, the timeline wobbled, and the one person whose account should have been precise could not keep his story straight. Something about the disappearance no longer fit the pattern of a simple missing adult. By midday on March 4, 1961, the service road outside Bend had been turned into a controlled scene. Deputies walked the shoulder in slow lines, then marked off a rectangle around Elena Ward's bicycle using wooden stakes and twine. The first inventory listed only 4 items within that box: the bicycle, the dark glove, a small paper receipt, and a single faint shoe impression in the damp gravel. The bicycle was a standard women's 3-speed, purchased used 4 months earlier at a hardware shop near downtown. Elena had paid in cash and registered the serial number on the shop card. At the scene, the rear fender carried a smear of reddish dirt that did not match the lighter soil on the road. The scrape on the left side of the frame was fresh enough that the metal edge felt rough to the touch. Her work bag, which she always carried in the front basket, was missing. So was the small metal key she used for the diner's side door. The glove lay about 2 feet from the bike, palm facing up. Technicians noted no visible tears, no staining, and no sign it had been ground into the dirt by a struggle. Its label showed a men's medium size, a brand sold at the mill supply store. In Elena's room, officers found only women's knit gloves, all smaller. The mismatch was entered in the log, but not given priority that day. The single shoe impression near the edge of the road measured longer and wider than Elena's known shoe size. A deputy placed his own boot beside it and wrote that it appeared closer to a men's size 10. No second clear print could be located. The ground beyond the shoulder quickly turned to frozen clumps and old tire ruts from logging trucks, erasing any neat pattern. Several feet beyond the marked area, deputies documented parallel tire tracks leading off the shoulder toward a cluster of trees. The spacing suggested a light truck or pickup. The impressions were shallow, with no sign of spinning or sudden acceleration. Photographs were taken using the department's aging camera, but some negatives later came back overexposed around the edges. No blood was found, no torn fabric, no personal item that could confirm violence at that spot. Yet the combination of a staged-looking bicycle, a glove that did not belong to Elena, and tire tracks leaving the road suggested that whatever had happened to her probably did not end there. In 1961, the only voices describing what happened around the service road came from hurried interviews typed on thin paper. Deputies moved from house to house that first weekend, asking the same questions, and wrote down answers that later investigators would study line by line. Most of those statements stayed buried in a file drawer for more than 50 years. One of the earliest was from a milk delivery driver named Harold Boone. He said that at about 6:40 a.m. on March 4th, he saw a brown pickup pulled over near the bridge on the mill road. The truck lights were off. A man stood at the back, facing the trees. Boone did not see a woman or a bicycle. He did not stop. His statement was marked, "No direct link to victim," and filed. A second key statement came from a mill worker, John Rivas, who carpooled along the same road at 7 a.m. He reported seeing a bicycle on its side and a patrol car already present. What stood out to him was a second vehicle leaving the area, a dark truck with an Oregon plate beginning with the number 4. He remembered it because the plate was dented on one corner. That detail never made it into the summary reports. In Sheriff Martin Cole's notebook, preserved with the case file, there is also a brief entry dated March 10th. It reads, Spoke with mobile mechanic from California. Says he serviced diner freezer last month. Drove brown Chevy, older plate, staying near mill housing. The mechanic's name is written once in the margin, then never appears in any follow-up forms. When the cold case unit finally reopened the file in 2016, an analyst scanned those same pages into a digital system. The software converted the faded typing into searchable text. That was when someone noticed that the margin note beside Cole's entry matched a name on an old vehicle registration list from that year. Until then, the mobile mechanic had been just another line in hundreds of pages. For the first time, the anonymous man with the brown truck had a full name, a partial address, and a trail that did not stop at the Bend city limits. In the days after Elena Ward vanished, the investigation split into three competing theories. Some deputies believed she had left town voluntarily. Others argued the scene by the service road showed a planned abduction. A smaller group, including Sheriff Martin Cole, still considered an accident followed by panic and concealment. Those ideas clashed in the paperwork. One report described the bicycle as likely placed. Another called it consistent with fall or skid. The dark glove was first tagged as possible suspect property. Later, it was relabeled unknown origin with no explanation. Even the official timeline shifted. Different summaries listed Elena's last confirmed sighting between 6:30 a.m. and 6:45 a.m. Outside the sheriff's office, pressure built quickly. Local papers in Bend and Redmond ran front-page stories about the missing waitress. Letters to the editor questioned why the search along the river stopped at sundown. A Sunday church bulletin urged parishioners to pray that Elena chooses to come home. That line reflected a growing belief that she had simply walked away from her life. That view entered the case file 2 weeks after the disappearance. An unsigned letter arrived at the sheriff's office. It read, "She is alive and gone by choice. Stop spending public money looking." The envelope was postmarked from Portland. The paper carried no usable fingerprints under the methods available in 1961. Cole noted in his log that he did not trust the letter. County officials still cited it during a budget meeting. Search operations were scaled back within days. Volunteers were told to stand down except on weekends. Roadblocks were removed from the mill road and the highway. Inside the department, disagreement hardened. Some investigators said treating Elena as a runaway was safer on paper if she later appeared. Others warned that every day without a full search reduced the chance of finding any trace of her. The argument ended in one sentence in the monthly summary. It read, "No new leads. Likelihood of voluntary departure increasing." Decades later, cold case reviewers would circle that line in red. To them, it marked the moment the investigation turned away from the road. What no one realized then was how closely that shift in focus matched the path of one brown truck. In 2016, when the Deschutes County Cold Case Unit began reprocessing unsolved files, the Ward disappearance was not a priority. It was one folder among hundreds pulled from metal cabinets and stacked on tables. What changed its status was not new witness testimony or a confession. It was a paper trail that reached far beyond Bend. A younger detective, assigned to review old vehicle references, searched the 1961 file for any license plate fragments. The note from Elena's notebook stood out. Or 497-something, older brown truck, same route again. He ran every 1960 and 1961 registration in Oregon, starting with those digits. One name kept overlapping with the file. A mobile mechanic registered to a brown Chevrolet pickup based in Bend, then listed as moving to Redding, California, in late 1961. His name was Raymond Tucker. Further digging revealed something stranger. In a box of microfilmed highway records from the Oregon Department of Transportation, an analyst found a scan of a way station slip dated March 4, 1961. It recorded a brown Chevy pickup, plate starting with or 497, passing through a checkpoint south of Bend at 8:12 a.m. The destination line read only private job, freezer repair. No officer in 1961 had linked that slip to Elena. The cold case team requested archived business records from Redding. Among decades of invoices from a small motel, they found a handwritten bill from March 6, 1961. It listed freezer service, cash, out-of-town client, Bend referral, and was signed R. Tucker. On the back of the same page, faint but still visible, was a rough note. It read, "Return north, No, too many questions already. A separate request to the old bin mill supply store turned up surviving ledgers. Several entries in early 1961 showed bulk purchases of the same glove brand found by Elena's bike, all billed to Tucker's account. The dark glove, once labeled unknown origin, now matched a customer who had left the state days after she vanished. None of this proved what had happened on the service road. It did something else. It drew a straight line from the anonymous brown truck in Bend to a named mechanic crossing the state line within hours of Elena's disappearance. For investigators, that line finally pointed to one question. What had Raymond Tucker been carrying with him when he drove south that morning? By the time investigators tied the brown pickup to Raymond Tucker, the case file on Elena Ward was already in the hands of the Deschutes County Cold Case Unit. In late 2016, the team presented their findings to the district attorney's office. The request was simple on paper and difficult in practice. Treat a 1961 missing adult file as a potential felony kidnapping and reopen every piece of surviving evidence with modern tools. The first obstacle was the evidence room. Flooding in the 1970s and a warehouse cleanout in the 1980s had destroyed most original items. The bicycle, the glove, and the twine used to mark the scene were gone. What remained were 3 sealed envelopes and a small metal tin labeled with the case number. Inside one envelope, technicians found a fragment of adhesive that had once secured tape around the bicycle grip, along with a faint ridge of material consistent with dried skin cells. In 1961, it had been logged only as residue from handlebar. In early 2017, that residue was sent to the Oregon State Police Forensic Laboratory under an age trace protocol. Analysts used repair enzymes and low-copy DNA methods normally reserved for decades-old homicide samples. After multiple attempts, they recovered a partial but usable genetic profile from the fragment. The lab compared it to a reference sample stored from the 1980s, when Elena's mother had volunteered blood for a state missing persons program. The results showed a direct maternal relationship. The trace on the handlebar belonged to the same family line as Elena Ward. The profile was then uploaded to the National Missing Persons Database and, under a separate process, queried against a commercial genealogy consortium that cooperated with law enforcement. Weeks passed with no result. Then, in May 2017, a hit appeared. A civilian profile under the name Linda Parsons, living in New Mexico, matched the handlebar DNA at a level consistent with the same individual rather than a distant relative. Because the match involved a living person, a different state, and a possible identity change, the district attorney requested federal assistance. The FBI opened a parallel file and flagged the case as a potential historical kidnapping and identity fraud investigation. Before they could contact Linda Parsons, agents needed to confirm one more fact: whether Raymond Tucker was still alive to face charges or already beyond the reach of any courtroom. Federal agents began with the simplest question: was Raymond Tucker even alive to answer for what happened on March 4, 1961? A records analyst pulled Social Security and motor vehicle data. Within hours, they located a death certificate from Coconino County, Arizona. It showed that Raymond Lee Tucker had died in a single vehicle crash near Flagstaff on October 9, 1989, at age 58. The Arizona Department of Public Safety still held the accident file in an off-site warehouse. When agents requested the box, they found routine documents, photographs of the wreck, and a small paper bag marked personal items. Inside were a metal watch, a motel key tag, and a worn pocket notebook with water damage at the edges. Most pages were filled with notes about carburetors, compressors, and mileage. Scattered between them were short sentences written in uneven pencil with no dates. One read, "I should have taken her back, but I was already too far." Another said, "She looked better once she was away from that road." The notebook did not mention Bend or Elena by name, but the wording was enough to keep the file open. Because Tucker was deceased, the district attorney could not present a criminal case to a grand jury. Instead, in late 2018, Deschutes County convened a public inquest-style hearing. A retired judge presided. Members of the Cold Case Unit, an FBI representative, and forensic experts testified under oath. They walked through the original scene photographs, the glove purchase records, the weigh station slip, and the genetic match to Linda Parsons. For the first time, Those pieces were shown together in one room and on one record. The judge's written finding was careful but direct. He concluded that Elena Ward had not left voluntarily in 1961. He stated that the evidence supported one conclusion. She had been taken from the roadside by Raymond Tucker, transported out of Oregon, and given a new identity without her informed consent. With that, the county formally reclassified the case as a solved historical kidnapping, non-prosecutable due to the suspect's death. The ruling cleared Tucker's file for public release, and it opened the door to one final step in the investigation, telling Linda Parsons who she really was. When the inquest findings were released in early 2019, agents from the FBI and the Deschutes County Cold Case Unit traveled to Albuquerque to meet Linda Parsons. She was 69 years old, worked part-time at a community center, and had lived her entire adult life under the name printed on her New Mexico driver's license. She agreed to speak with investigators only after they provided a written summary of their work and copies of the court order authorizing contact. The first meeting took place in a small conference room at a federal building. A forensic specialist explained the DNA results in plain language. The profile taken from the old handlebar residue matched her genetic sample with a probability of error so low it was treated as 0. They showed her the 1961 missing person flyer for Elena Ward, then a photograph recovered from her mother's belongings. Linda looked at it for a long time and said the face seemed familiar in a way she could not explain. She remembered, however, being told as a young adult that her birth records had been destroyed in a fire and that there were no baby pictures. Over several sessions with a psychologist present, investigators went through the timeline. They told her about Bend, the service road, the brown truck, and the inquest decision naming her a victim of kidnapping and identity fraud. Linda signed a statement acknowledging that she accepted the scientific findings, but she did not consent to any criminal label for the people who had raised her. She said her adoptive parents had been kind and had never hinted at any secret. When offered the opportunity to meet surviving members of Elena's family, she agreed under one condition. The meeting would be private, off-camera, and with no press. Later that year, in a room at the Deschutes County Courthouse, she met a cousin who had been a child when Elena disappeared and an older woman who had known her mother. There were no speeches, just a careful confirmation of identity, a few shared photographs, and a formal signature on the paperwork changing her legal name back to Elena Ward. In the years that followed, the Ward case was added to training modules for cold case investigators across Oregon. It was used to demonstrate how a fragment of tape, a partial plate number, and a preserved blood card could combine to resolve a file once considered impossible. When asked by a reporter if she saw herself as a survivor, Elena only said one sentence. She said the important question was how many other old files still held names of people who had never really vanished at all.